always feel that the monsters are not born, but created. What if every evil, every horrifying act, every villain like me in the movie The Dark Knight was a product of this deep darkness? I changed my life thoroughly. I became monster. I changed my life perceptions because this society was behaving like I was a monster. So I become the monster. Let me tell you that in every corner of history, in every shadowed alley of human experience, there are stories of people who once were just like normal humans, but somewhere in the heart of their journey, they changed. The world, through its wounds and pressures, transformed them into something unrecognizable, something dangerous, something monstrous. And what about us? Could we too become monsters? In the right circumstances, could we be shaped by the same forces, influenced by the same manipulations, and led down the same dark path? These aren't just questions for philosophers or historians to wrestle with. These are the questions that define us as human beings. There are those among us who are labeled as evil, as dangerous to the world around them. And history tells us these labels are not given lightly. People like Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, and countless others who stand as symbols of terror and cruelty, were they born with a thirst for blood? Or were they products of something far more terrifying, a society that shaped them, that pushed them, that turned them into what they became? This is the story we've been told, isn't it? That monsters are born out of hatred, or madness, or evil. But what if this story is incomplete? What if instead, monsters are made, created by the very world that surrounds them, forged by systems of power, by trauma, by manipulation, crafted by the very hands of society itself? Tonight, we'll take a journey through history, psychology, and philosophy to explore one of the darkest truths about human nature, that monsters, those beings we fear, those figures we call evil, are not born but created. And as we dig deeper, as we peel back the layers of history and human behavior, one thing will become clearer than ever. The line between human and monster is far thinner than we ever imagined. What if we are all just one step away from becoming something unrecognizable, something monstrous? Let's find out. Throughout history, we have been haunted by the faces of villains, figures who stand as symbols of evil, fear, and destruction. But what if these monsters weren't born, but created by the world they inhabited? Fast forward to modern history, and the concept of the monster takes on a much darker human form. Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, and other notorious leaders are prime examples of individuals who became monsters, but not because they were born evil. They were products of their environments, shaped by their experiences, and influenced by the circumstances of their time. Hitler's rise to power, for instance, wasn't the result of an innate thirst for power. Born in 1889, he came from a relatively modest background, but the environment in which he grew up, the collapse of the Weimar Republic, the humiliation of Germany after World War I, the economic devastation created a perfect storm for a charismatic and opportunistic figure to emerge. Hitler wasn't born a monster, but the world he entered gave him the tools to become one. The societal collapse, the anger, the desire for revenge, and the appeal of a nationalistic vision all played a role in shaping his mind. And with the help of propaganda, a figure who could speak to the grievances of the masses was born. He didn't create the monster, society did. The human mind is fragile, easily influenced, and shaped by forces far beyond our control. What if the so-called monsters of history, the figures we fear, despise, or condemn, were not born evil, but made by the very traumas they experienced? To understand how this happens, we must delve into the psyche, the inner workings of the human mind. And when we do, we find that trauma, neglect, societal pressures, and conditioning all play a crucial role in forming who we are and how we behave. These forces can twist the human soul, turning someone who might have once been innocent into something unrecognizable. Someone society deems a monster. In every society, there are forces that seek to shape the narrative, forces that mold perceptions, control minds, and in the process, create villains out of ordinary individuals or entire groups. These forces are not subtle. They are as deliberate as they are powerful. Propaganda, the manipulation of information, is perhaps the most effective tool used by the state, the elites, and the powerful to create monsters that serve their purposes. One of the most tragic examples of this process in history is the demonization of the Jewish people during the Nazi regime in Germany. Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party used propaganda to paint Jews as subhuman, as a dangerous, insidious force that threatened the very fabric of German society. They were portrayed not as individuals, but as a collective other, with characteristics so foreign and evil that they needed to be eliminated for the greater good. This dehumanization was not accidental. It was the result of a deliberate campaign designed to stir hatred, fear, and ultimately violence. The Nazis didn't simply propagate the idea that Jews were different. They painted them as monsters, as vermin, as something that had to be eradicated for society to be saved. The media, newspapers, films, posters, and speeches worked tirelessly to promote this narrative, making it so ingrained in the national psyche that it justified the horrors of the Holocaust. The demonization of Jews was not just an act of hatred. It was a carefully orchestrated psychological campaign that used propaganda to create an entire society of people who viewed the other as a monster deserving of annihilation. The world watched as propaganda fueled the rise of one of history's most horrific genocides. In today's world, this process has only become more sophisticated. Social media, 24-hour news cycles, and digital platforms have accelerated the spread of propaganda. Consider the way certain political figures or movements are portrayed in the media. Through selective coverage, the distortion of facts, and the amplification of extreme voices, entire groups can be branded as monsters simply for challenging the status quo. The media's ability to create fear, to fabricate narratives, is unparalleled. It is no longer just about telling a story, it's about crafting a reality. So, how does this relate to the creation of monsters? The answer lies in the way fear is spread through media. Fear is the fuel that feeds hatred, and hatred is what allows societies to dehumanize others, to create the monsters that serve the interests of those in power. These monsters are not born, they are made. They are products of a calculated, deliberate process that exploits human psychology and the power of narrative through propaganda. The media shapes not only what we believe, but how we act. It turns ordinary individuals into monsters simply by creating a story where they must be feared, fought, and eliminated. In this way, propaganda doesn't just manipulate, it transforms society itself, turning fear into a weapon and creating enemies where none may exist. Modern society creates these monsters in many ways. We live in a world where power is often granted to those who can manipulate the system to their advantage, where success is measured by the accumulation of wealth and control, and where empathy is often viewed as a weakness rather than a strength. In this environment, people are encouraged to disregard the needs of others, to see life as a game in which only the strong survive. The result is a society that fosters the development of individuals who lack empathy, who view others as tools to be used rather than fellow human beings deserving of respect and care. This is the uncomfortable truth we must confront. The monsters of today are not always born, they are made. They are products of a system that rewards the ruthless and punishes the compassionate. They are shaped by childhood traumas, societal neglect, and the pressures of a world that values success above all else. So who are the real monsters? Are they the individuals who commit heinous acts of violence, or are they the systems and structures that create the conditions in which such monsters can thrive? When we look at today's world, the answer is not as clear-cut as we might hope. The monsters we fear are often not some distant mythological creatures. They are the result of a complex web of psychological, social, and cultural forces that shape the way people think, act, and ultimately become. Consider the Joker, the iconic villain from DC Comics. At first glance, he may seem like an embodiment of chaos and evil, but delve deeper into his backstory, and we begin to see how his madness is a consequence of his environment. A victim of abuse, neglect, and the harshness of society, the Joker becomes a symbol of the fractured human psyche, an individual who was pushed beyond the brink by a world that offered no solace. In his twisted mind, the world is just as cruel as the treatment he received, and so he responds with anarchy, believing that only through chaos can true freedom be found. The truth is, the monster is not the end of the story. It's a symptom of a much larger problem. It's a sign of something broken within our systems, a reflection of the dark undercurrents of power, manipulation, and neglect that permeate our world. But here's the hope. If we understand the roots of these monsters, if we grasp the conditions that create them, we can begin to rewrite the story. Redemption, both personal and collective, is possible, and it begins with awareness. Self-awareness is the first step in breaking free from the cycle. Understanding how our own behaviors, choices, and responses to trauma shape the way we view the world and others is vital. We must begin by acknowledging the role we each play. In the creation of societal narratives, the world does not just shape us, it reacts to our perceptions and actions. By questioning our own biases, understanding our own trauma, and recognizing how societal conditioning influences our views of good and evil, we take the first step toward breaking the cycle. But it doesn't stop with the individual. To break the cycle, we must also address the systemic forces that play the power structures, the institutions that manipulate and define what it means to be human. If we change how society views trauma, if we stop glorifying power at the expense of others, if we stop casting people into the role of other or monster based on arbitrary definitions of morality, we can begin to build a society where compassion, understanding, and collective responsibility take precedence over fear and control. The responsibility doesn't just lie with individuals or the elites who hold power. It is shared by all of us. If we as a society can collectively shift our focus toward healing rather than punishment, toward understanding rather than demonization, we can begin to break free from the chains that keep creating monsters. It's a daunting task, but it's one that is within our grasp. It requires a fundamental change in how we view human nature and ultimately how we view each other. The message is simple but profound. We are not destined to create or become monsters. We have the power to change the narrative by looking at history, by examining the psychological and social forces that shape us, and by refusing to let trauma, power, and fear define who we are. We can create a future where monsters are no longer a byproduct of our broken systems. Instead, we can cultivate a world where healing, redemption, and the understanding of our shared humanity are at the forefront. This is why I became a monster. But the pain always was in me, but changed it into power.